I'd like to start with an expression from Rumi, who was a mystic and who wrote wonderful words about astrology. So Adam is the astrolabe of the sublime attributes. The human being is the theater of God's signs. What appears in the human is a reflection of God, like the moon's reflection in stream water. On this astrolabe are engraved complex designs, which represent the eternal attributes. It is from the unseen sphere and spirit sun that the designs teach their lessons from the beginning. The engraved designs and the guiding astrolabe are without the astronomer in the hands of the vulgar. God gave the knowledge of astronomy to the prophets because the mystery needs special mystery-seeing eyes. Here Rumi gives us the key to the understanding of Arab and Persian astrology. This key is understanding that astrology can be seen only with a special mystery-seeing eyes, and we'll try to unveil some mysteries of Arab Persian astrology today. So we got acquainted with the system of Fardars through the Latin translations of the Arabic texts. But the problem with these translations and the problem with the traditional techniques in the West is that there were several large periods of transfer of astrological knowledge when it was transmitted from one language to another, from one culture to another, including the period between the 17th and late 19th centuries when Western astrology practically died. However, each time such a transmission took place, it occurred in a different language or in another culture, or to one degree or another changed. This means that some doctrines, concepts, and practices of Western astrology were rethought, transformed, distorted, and sometimes disappeared from the active work of astrologers. I am citing Chris Brennan's Hellenistic Astrology, the study of fate and fortune. He formulated this problem very well, excellently, in his treatise. One of such disappeared and rediscovered concepts turned out to be the concept of planetary periods, the most famous of which was the technique of the so-called Fardars, or according to the definition of Robert Zoller, who discovered it and who presented it to the Western astrological community, the astrological prediction method, which is the basic pattern common to any charts, horoscopes, common both day and night, leading a native through the conditions and determination represented by planets in their natal charts. It is a little bit confusing definition, however, we'll see later that it describes the system very well. So the problem with practicing of all astrological techniques, and especially in relation to Fardars. So this technique appeared and practiced in Persian, Arabic, and later in Latin. It has existed within the framework of another religious and philosophical culture. Islam is generously focused on esotericism, and therefore it is required to remove the veils both in the philosophical sense and in the purely astrological one. So it is principal esoteric system. And the last but not least problem is that this technique is described only in technical terms in the text, and it is not explained. It is not open to the practitioner. So in fact, it is like a note for those who want to remember. It is just a technical note, but not the essence or the content of the technique. I hope most of you know that at the late 80s and the beginning of 90s of the previous century, there was a strong trend to return to the traditional astrological techniques. It was initiated by Robert Hand, by Robert Zoller, and by Robert Schmidt as a translator, and later as an astrologer. And this trend existed for maybe 20 years. And after 20 years of translating and presenting astrological traditional texts to the astrological public, Robert Hand concluded, "We did not completely digest traditional astrology. To use the right term, we didn't master the methods." Robert Schmidt always stressed that technique should follow philosophy. So at first we need to know philosophy, and then we can understand the technique. Zoller used to say that the complete study of astrology is not diligently digging up the writings of the ancients and carefully studying them, but more in penetrating their intrinsic meaning and rediscovering their way of perception, and also in trying to see the world as the ancients saw it, if we want to understand their metaphysics. The technique of Fardars was first described by Abu-Mashar. At least it is established that he was the first to describe it fully, although there are some notes on the previous sources, but they are not supported by just clear evidence, and we don't have any definite sources or texts for that. So Abu-Mashar is the first source who described the technique. Abu-Mashar was a very interesting figure in the world of astrology. He was born on the 10th of August 787 in Balkh, and he lived approximately 100 years. He was Persian mathematician, astronomer, and astrologer. During 10 years, he lived in India, in Benares, where he studied Indian astronomy. He wrote Zich of Thousands, Zich Compounds and Penetrations, the book on the shape of the celestial sphere and the differences in its ascents, and so on and so forth. So he was very fruitful author. Not all of his writings survived, and one of the important treatises on the traditional astrology didn't survive at all. So we don't have the complete list and text of his works. He worked at the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. The other very interesting feature about Abu-Mashar, that he was the student of Al-Kindi. He began to study astrology at the age of 47 years, and we'll talk about it later in our lecture. He was one of the key figures in the transmission of Greek, Indian, Iranian, and Syrian astrological, mathematical, cosmological, and philosophical thoughts. And among his sources, we find the Greek, Indo-Iranian tradition of Pahlavi in astrology, astronomy, and theurgy, Sanskrit, Greek, Indian tradition in astrology and astronomy, Greek tradition in philosophy, astronomy, and astrology, Syrian Neoplatonizing philosophy of astral influences and theurgy from Al-Kindi and Haran's books. And here there is some small list of his major writings in astrology. That is a great introduction. And we have two brilliant translations of the great introduction to astrology from two different translations done by the group of translators, and they are connected to the Warburg Institute, and the other beautiful translation with commenters by Benjamin Dykes.